Hello, it's October 24th, 2016, as I'm speaking to you, approximately 2 weeks from the 2016 presidential and congressional elections. Donald Trump has proposed a lot of scary things. If you have insurance through the Obamacare program, weak T that it is, but if you have that insurance coverage, you have every right to be afraid of what he might do should he get in and get a congressional majority. Another scary thing he proposes, and these two, the Obamacare situation and the economic situation, are actually the ones that would hurt people the most, really, because basic problems that we have in our society do come down to economics a lot of times. If people were economically well off, if they didn't have to worry about food security, job security, health insurance, then a lot of other problems would go away with that. So this problem of eliminating the insurance under Obamacare and also a return to Reaganomics are actually the biggest threat proposed by the biggest threats contained in policies proposed by Donald Trump. And I can understand reasons why people would be afraid of those things. But here are two likely scenarios if Donald Trump were to be elected, and the polls aren't in his favor on this day. Of course, there have been some issues with polls being wrong in the Brexit vote and a number of other votes in other countries. But at this time, Trump is behind in the polls. So if he were to be elected, here are two likely scenarios. One is he has a Republican congressional majority. What would happen in that case, a possibility of what might happen in that case, is he actually gets his program through. He repeals Obamacare and throws 20-something million people who were insured off the insurance rolls. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is this return to Reaganomics, a system where you cut taxes for the rich in the hope that they're going to use the money and invest the money to create jobs, which really doesn't work very well. Reaganomics has been thoroughly debunked, in my view. In 2001, right after he took office, George Bush and his Congress, the Congress that was in office at the time, enacted the biggest tax cuts in U.S. history at that time, about $1 trillion in tax cuts, aimed mostly at the upper income levels. It was a huge tax cut. It was Reaganomics in the extreme. And what followed after those tax cuts in 2001 was a very lackluster economic recovery, which may not even have been attributable to those tax cuts. And after a few years of that, with job growth that was only around half of what happened during 4 years of the Carter administration and Bush's 8 years, then you had the worst economic downturn since the Great Recession. And if you want to see proof that Reaganomics doesn't work, just look at a lot of these red states. Some of the most conservative states in the entire country, those with low taxes and minimal regulation in the Deep South and in Kansas and some similar places, those are the poorest states in the whole country. You go there and you don't have a lot of re-regulation, don't have a lot of social services, taxes are very low, and the population is very poor. So Reaganomics doesn't work. So one possibility is Trump gets elected and that program gets through. If that happens, that's a disaster, and it's a setup for progressives to come roaring back in 2020, 4 years down the road. Another scenario is if Trump were to be elected, he gets elected and there is a Democratic takeover of the Senate. So what happens in that case? In that case, his program gets blocked. He doesn't get to repeal Obamacare. He doesn't get to roll back to Reaganomics. His program basically doesn't get through at all. His judicial appointments are blocked, so he doesn't get to reshape the Supreme Court. The Senate has done a good job pulling that one on Obama with his latest nominee to the Supreme Court, who isn't going to get confirmed and isn't going to be on the court. A Democratic Senate would block Trump's judicial nominees to the Supreme Court and would also block his program. Okay, in either case, you've got an administration that 4 years down the road is seen as a failure. If he gets those policies through, Reaganomics, and doing away with Obamacare, weak T that it is, people are going to be extremely angry. His administration will likely be seen as a failure. If he gets blocked, his administration will likely be seen as a failure. That's a perfect setup for a progressive takeover in 2020. You know, progressivism could take over the Congress and the White House easily in 2020 under either one of those two circumstances, because people would just be so angry. But let's look at the other side. What if Hillary Clinton wins the election? Well, here's the thing. If Hillary wins, the Republicans are going to keep control of the House. That may be a newsflash to a lot of people. I know a lot of people don't actually know that Republicans control the House of Representatives, and they've been effectively blocking Obama for the last 6 years, since January 2011. I know some people think, well, Obamacare happened after that. No, it didn't. It was passed by a Democratic majority Congress in 2010 and just didn't go into effect until several years later. Congress has effectively, since Republicans took over the House in the 2010 election, Congress has effectively blocked Obama at every time. That's what's going to happen to Hillary. There will be a Republican House of Representatives, and her program will not go through. All these wonderfully progressive ideas that she's talked about on the campaign trail will not go through. And here's what's worse. If there's a serious economic downturn under a Hillary administration with Republicans in control of the House, her administration isn't going to be able to do anything about that, because the Republican House will block it. And so, with Republicans in control of the House of Representatives, we would see not any progressive legislation for her entire term, because her party would lose more seats, very likely, in the off-year election, because that's generally the way it works. That's generally always the way it works. President party always loses during midterm elections. So she goes in completely hobbled by this Republican House of Representatives and can't get her program through, and she is seen as a failure. Okay, if Hillary is seen as a failure, what other options exist? Well, here's the thing. Political parties don't dump incumbent presidents, because that's an admission of failure. She would be renominated as the Democratic nominee in 2020, because not to vote for her again, not to renominate her, that is an admission of failure. Republicans didn't even dump Herbert Hoover in the middle of the recession. That's seen as a failure. So what is the other alternative? The other alternative is to vote for the Republican candidate. That's the only way to get rid of a failed Hillary, would be to vote Republican. And that could end up with President Rubio or President Cruz or some other lunatic in the White House. So here's what I'm telling you. Hillary gets in this time around, what you're probably going to have is 8 years of an abyss, of no progress on any major issue whatsoever, because she's stymied and blocked by a Republican House, and then voters get rid of her by putting in the only other option, a Republican, in 2020. Is it possible a third-party movement could arise? Third parties don't have a good history in the United States, and neither do independent candidacies. One would hope that something like that could happen, but let's face it, it's just not very likely. Outsider movements have not worked well. So, Hillary gets elected, she's blocked by the House, her presidency fails. The other option is either re-elect her and get more failure, or put in a Republican and get more failure. So basically, electing Hillary, you're just going into the abyss with 8 years of no significant progress on any issue whatsoever. Isn't that a lovely thought? On the other hand, if Trump gets in and fails, that could reignite the progressive movement, and there could be a complete progressive takeover of the government in 2020. Now, I know some of you are listening to me and think, well, that's a hell of a gamble, and yes, it is. But here's something I've learned from the world of professional poker. Did you know there are people who make their living playing poker? There really are. They're on the World Poker Tour and in the World Series of Poker and various poker tournaments, and they earn their living playing poker. In fact, some of them have given up conventional jobs to earn their living at playing poker. And you know who the ones are who win consistently and who make a good living at the poker table so that they don't have to have conventional jobs? People who bet a lot. They also have to have skill as players. They also have to be a very skilled player, but they also have to take a lot of risk. That's just traditionally the way it works. They have to get into the no-limit poker games. And yes, it is a hell of a risk to put somebody like Trump in and try to get a Democrat Senate in. That is a hell of a risk, and things could go badly wrong. But that may be the only possibility for a progressive takeover in 2020, where somebody taking positions like Bernie Sanders might actually get elected. Because with Hillary in office, all you have is this other situation. She reruns in 2020, and the only option to get her out is to vote Republican. So that means 8 years of no progress. Is it a risk to allow Trump to get in? Yeah, it is a risk, but I think a progressive comeback could actually happen in 4 years if he were to get in. Now, am I going to vote for him? I don't think so. It's just hard to vote for either one of these two people. I don't like either one of them, especially. I'm thinking of writing in Jerry Brown, the governor of California, and I might come back and tell you why on that. And that might, votes like that might lead to a Trump victory. But I can see a progressive comeback, a big one, in 2020 if Trump were to get in. It's hard to see that under Hillary because of what I just described. Now, you people would listen to that possibly and say, well, you're just speculating. You don't know what you're actually talking about. Well, it's pretty well educated speculation, because I did get about 24 hours of political science in college, and am a lifetime member of Pi Sigma Alpha, the Political Science Honor Society. And I also, earlier in my life, spent a little bit of time working in media. All that's not listed on my profile. And I also have been watching the political scene for many years, more years than I want to admit. So while it's true that this is speculation, it's pretty well educated speculation. It's pretty well grounded speculation. I'm not just somebody who doesn't have a clue. I'm not somebody who pays attention once every 4 years and just commenting. I've been watching politics for a long time. I'm about done watching politics because it's so depressing. I don't even like to watch the news anymore. Hillary and Donald, those are the two choices. Neither one of them is a good choice. The country is basically screwed, blued, and tattooed no matter what happens there. But I think a way out of the mess might be easier under a Trump presidency. Now, a lot of people would think, well, we've got to worry about right now. Yes, you have to worry about right now, but if it's all about right now and nothing's about the future, then the future probably isn't going to be that good. So there's a lot to worry about with these two candidates. Who am I worried about more? I'm actually worried more about a Hillary victory because of what I just said. Because the only option to get her out would be to vote Republican in 4 years. And so you have a bad Democrat versus a Republican. That's a way out of the mess, isn't it? Excuse me. Anyway, that's something to think about, because as bad and as awful as a Trump presidency might be, and 4 years does seem like an awfully long time, but it might actually be a shorter route to a progressive victory in 2020. And we do need to learn to be a lot more concerned about long-term consequences. I do think a key to a progressive victory, a shorter route, might actually be if Trump were to win. Hillary gets in, it's hard to see a progressive victory for a long time to come because of the reasons I just gave you. And so that's my take on who I'm worried about more. The two of these, there are a lot of reasons to be afraid of what's going to happen if one of them gets in. But for the reasons I just gave you, I'm a lot more worried about a Clinton victory than I am a Trump victory, even though I don't like that. And so that's my take on who worries me the most. Have a good day.